Few little church notices, as always, nothing too dramatic, all largely positive. I think in the last 6 hours this morning, results have been presented that suggest that the AstraZeneca vaccine may, in fact, reduce the spread of coronavirus. So in addition to giving you some protection at a personal level, it's also good for your fellow man and woman. The UK has been given its first COVID jab now. 9.6 million people have had the jab so far, which is amazing. The results of the study suggest that the vaccine may have substantial effects on the transmission of the virus. It means that the jab could actually give you greater immunity and impact on the pandemic than we'd originally thought. And every person that's vaccinated will indirectly protect other people too. So not only will you be doing yourself a favour, you'll be doing everyone around you a favour if and when you have it. As well as showing the effects on the transmission, the study goes on to say the vaccine currently offered by AstraZeneca is giving us 76% effective protection from a single dose for up to 3 months, with no fall in protection during that 3-month period. And the researchers have confirmed that the result supports the government's decision to actually give a second dose anywhere between the 4 and 12-week period. So the good news is at the current rate, the vaccine should reach a tipping point in national coverage by the early part of June, suggesting hopefully that a relaxation in the current lockdown may be possible earlier than had previously been suggested. Now, getting people protected and back to work is desperately needed for all businesses of all types. I guess today's conversation, which really focuses on the nature of the high street, it's really the high street amongst the worst, I guess, that's been affected by the pandemic. Many people will argue that obviously this is a continuation of a trend that existed prior to COVID and has been nearly accelerated by COVID. But the high street, as we know, it is a big unknown. And if we think about the deals, recent deals with Boohoo and ASOS, heaping further pressure on the government to change the way it taxes the likes of Amazon, it's very interesting to be thinking about really where the future of the high street may end and where the future of the high street may be. And by the high street, by the way, I mean not just obviously our local high streets. I'm referring here to the shopping malls, the out-of-town retailers, and so on. Every sort of bricks and mortar type operation, whether it's food and beverage, whether it's chemists, whether it's any manner of department stores, all of them have been hit. Meanwhile, of course, you've probably read overnight that Amazon founder Jeff Bezos is to step down as chief executive of the e-commerce giant, which he started in his garage nearly 30 years ago. Why is it Americans always start businesses in garages? Anyway, I guess he's got to try and figure out how he's going to spend 192 billion pounds that he's managed to amass in that 30-year period. Yet the share price valuations of online retailers, including Amazon, suggest that a post-pandemic status quo and a near unlimited runway of growth is still very much in the eyes of the investors, at least, to be a natural progression. So, in short, the sector, as we know it, has been humbled by, I guess, historic mismanagement and, of course, the rise of the online retailer. We now, I guess, would need to take our attention and listen to today's panel. We have, as ever, a hand-picked panel, a great panel of retail experts from a variety of different backgrounds to help us answer some of these questions. So I'm really pleased to be able to welcome, I hope she can actually hear us, Tasha Gladman, who's the founder of Flintlock, a strategic marketing consultancy. Tasha is a creative corporate marketeer with over 30 years experience working in the FMCG world, as well as retail. She leads on innovation, communication, and product development across a breadth of businesses, as well as local and international businesses. Her impressive track record of brand turnarounds delivered through a combination of compelling vision, new positionings, bold communication, and a clear innovation roadmap has built an impressive catalogue of work for the likes of Unilever, Mars, Findus, Tesco's, Hovis, and Grants. She's also acted as an interim CMO for the likes of retail giants B&Q, Co-op Food, and Boots. And she also works with ambitious scale-ups and startups. Clients include the fast-growing e-tailer Boohoo and next-gen content creator StoryStream. And she somehow managed to combine all of that with her passion for sailing as an NED of the Royal Yachting Association. Sue Benson is Managing Director of the Behaviours agency. Sue has worked in and around retail for over 20 years, starting life at the coalface at Marks and Spencer's before moving agency side to work for McCann Erickson, where she led retail projects for Magnet, Clarks, Sainsbury's, and Office World. She founded the Behaviours agency, a behavioural science-led creative business with her business partner to help brands and retailers decode the decisions their customers make and the influence that behavioural science can have on the customer journey. Her clients today include Sharps Bedrooms, Well Pharmacy, Amazon, Boohoo, and Cardine Flooring. A brand of business strategist and her heart, she's in her element on the shop floor and is a huge advocate of the role of colleagues in the shopping experience. Julian Dailly is Executive Vice President and Consumer Insight Practice Savanta, a business he helped found just 6 years ago. Julian comes from an industry background, originally trained as an accountant at Ford Motor Company. He then moved into strategy and marketing at Sainsbury's for 6 years. Following this, he did another 6-year stint at Interbrand, managing their global brand valuation proposition, where he was managing director, where he was head of brand valuation. He then became managing director of a 175-year-old children's sight loss charity, directing successful rebrand and turnaround. Julian comes to research as a non-researcher, focusing on what research can do to help decision makers make progress. For those that know Savanta, Savanta is a insight consultancy research business. The consumer team that is headed up by Julian is some 100 clients, from the very largest of retailers to restaurants to startups, and also helps support investment analysts. Geraint Edwards is the global head of service design at Tangerine, a role he took up in the middle of COVID. In this new job, he will be building on the consultancy's international capabilities in service and experience design. He's recently been working with long-standing Tangerine clients LG and Nikon on design and innovation projects, looking at future business models and products for emerging market sectors. Geraint began his career as a global design consultancy, IDEO, before going on to lead some of the company's largest programs of work, including envisaging human behavioural changes in kitchens, the future of IKEA, and redesigning the care home experience for relatives for Care UK. His experience in healthcare then took him on to work for Boohoo as their global design director in their newly constructed consumer lab. For those that are new to Tangerine, they are a leading 30-year-old international design consultancy with clients at the forefront of customer experience design, creating game-changing products, services, and experiences. From their London studios and in Seoul and in Brazil, Tangerine works globally with leading service providers, retailers, and manufacturers from industry sectors that span mobility, retail, hospitality, lifestyle, well-being, and healthcare. So there you have it. We have a designer, a service designer. We have a research and insight specialist. We have a managing director and founder of a behavioral-led advertising and creative agency. And we have a consultant who has spent most of her working life, both client side and agency side, advising brands in the retail sector. So cracking group of people. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Thank you too for everyone for joining the call. I'm going to start with a question, if I may, for Sue. I'll just unmute you all, if I may. Sue, I've kind of depicted, I guess, a bit of an Armageddon for the high street there. I mean, I'm not sure I've been entirely fair, but what, in your view, what's to become of the high street? Sue, we need to get you off mute.
Unmute, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's a huge and enormous question, and not one that I think we'll necessarily answer today. But I think we have to start by thinking about it in a much more positive frame than we're doing now. There's so much coverage of the death of the high street. It's almost self-perpetuating, and we have to, I think, as leaders in our respective businesses and with our clients, change the dialogue about it and be about the positive rebirth of it almost, rather than the death of it, because it will just carry on in that way. I think fundamentally, though, it won't look like it does today, because it has to get to a place that is, I guess, benefits from all of the positive things that have happened out of COVID. So the sense of localness, the sense of community that everybody's been thriving on. We need to get that energy back into those environments. But that means complete product mix change, completely different approach to space planning. And I guess fundamentally, remember, I mean, I'm actually a huge advocate of high streets, despite kind of the growth everywhere else. That we're really social people. So we like seeing each other and we like being with each other, and we actually like shopping, God forbid. And some of us really like shopping and actually being in those physical spaces. So I think we have to build on what's important and what behaviours are important. But yeah, it'll look completely different than it does today.
Thank you, Sue. And same question, if I may, to you, Tasha.
I would massively concur with Sue. I was just thinking then, we've just recently done a very interesting project for Decathlon, helping them with their positioning. And they've got 45 shops, and I get they're not on the high street, but they're very much a destination, which I think's interesting that you go there. And we've been really sort of, as we've been looking at how you balance the bricks and the clicks and make it all work, I think what you don't get as easily online is that customer service and the colleagues, or in Decathlon's case they call them teammates, which I really like, and there's almost a reason why they do that, and they ensure they have real experts on any sport, of which they've got 70 in a shop. And therefore, why do you go? Well, you go if you might not know much about a sport and you want to get some help and you want some support, and maybe I want to start paragliding, God forbid, could do. Then what kit do I need? And I think that's quite interesting, that depending what you're shopping for, you need help on some stuff. And it's quite arduous, I think, working through websites. Of course, you can then do YouTube and this and that. But sometimes, to Sue's point, you just want to talk to someone. So for me, it's about actually, when going forward, when you're recruiting your teammates, your colleagues in retail, we need to have much more focus on service. Almost, you got to take a leaf out of the Americans' book, I lived there for 4 years. They really do service. So it's actually, maybe that's the framing. What's the benefit? What do I want to get when I go shopping? And then how does the high street or the shops deliver that up over and above what I get from looking at a screen? And that's almost it's about the whole, not slices. And I find in retail, what always happened is people always look at it in slices. They're like, oh my God, I've got to protect my bricks. I don't want the clicks to grow. And that's the wrong way. It's actually, what's the total brand offering with all the elements in play? And I think that then changes the frame of how you approach it.
Thanks, Tasha. I mean, Geraint, when you're looking at new space and you're looking at actually reinventing that environment, what sorts of things are your clients saying to you around the world? Because I appreciate, obviously, you're working in China and other marketplaces, arguably are more advanced than we are when it comes to reconfiguration of space. What are clients asking for? And more importantly, what are consumers saying?
A lot of the ways that we approach work like this is actually trying to explain what service design is to a lot of our clients. So, I think gone are the days where you can build a wonderful store and open the doors and hope people just come in, right? I think you need to position a store, a physical experience, as part of a bigger customer journey. And that's the sort of work that we do a lot at Tangerine, which is, okay, let's design a really desirable retail experience that we think and hope that people need, but that's not enough anymore. And you need to craft the entire customer experience, from when you potentially, I've seen on Sunglasses Hut this week, actually, that you can now book appointments to go in to have your sunglasses. That was a new service, right? That you can book appointments to go into to have that retail experience. And from the beginning of the journey, where you hear about a certain shop opening, to maybe booking a chance to go and meet a stylist or an engaged sales assistant, for example, and then go and have this great experience. And then what is the journey after that experience? Obviously, we all know about good return policies and good customer service after, when you have bought a product or a service. But thinking more holistically about the whole customer journey, I think is such an important part of that.
Okay, so I mean, commenting on the China experience and what's happening there, I know that there's lots of really interesting examples of how they are reconfiguring space. So there's a much more of a resi and a shopping experience in one. And we've seen, obviously, how retail has evolved over the last 30 years to, particularly with malls and out of shopping, to be much more entertainment based. What's likely to be the next iteration of that?
It also comes down to the fact that, inherently retail was about transactions. And I think customers and consumers and just people, right? We're all looking for relationships with brands now, and it can't be just a transactional experience. The role of a flagship store in these big cities around the world is where you go and engage with the brand. And I think we'll see much more micro, maybe, I don't know if this is even a term, micro flagship stores where you can go and really engage with a brand. I think we spoke about this earlier in the week. The role of the disengaged sales assistant surely has to die off. And to Tasha's point, and taking the American service model, engaged people in stores. We're all gagging for human interaction at the moment, and I think that's got to be when we start opening back up. I think we'll see. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of good people who are being made redundant in this process of the COVID pandemic over the pandemic, and I think that means that that's an opportunity for retailers to bring great passionate people in store and to educate people and serve people in a much better way than we ever did before.
Thanks, Geraint. Julian, turn to you. Obviously, you've got access to reams of data and evidence and all sorts of insights into trends that are happening for the retail environment. Maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of your thoughts on where we're evolving to.
I think it's we look at data all the time, all different types of data, and having looked at data and sort of tried to understand and make sense of data for decades, one of my first starting points is always to recognize that when you're seeing something or you're looking at something, what you're actually doing is you are observing the outcome of a process. And when you're trying to understand that data, you have to go back and say, what has led to this data? And I think some of the factors that we identify are quite recent. So, the internet and the sort of digitization of activities that happen on the high street explain some of the declines on the high street. But I think also the beginnings of what we see today happened, decades and decades ago, when I think we had a belief that, shops were the answer. And I think that there's actually just too many shops. And so what we're looking at really is a kind of a correction in the sense that there's just too much supply. And that not only do we have too many shops, but we have a sort of propensity within UK business to think that the sort of like the ambition of a successful proposition is to create a national chain. So like an obsession with creating national chains, where you've got sort of scaled economics, and often with private equity capital, which make an assumption that we can all scale a chain. And we see, particularly within casual dining, for example, that there was just too many pizzas, too many places to buy two similar items. And like the effect of that, then you can see in the data, which is, as soon as you have supply exceeding demand, you just have continuous price pressure. So, never ending discounting, and then the consequent removal of overheads and fixed costs. So poor labor models, reducing service experiences, and eventually like a decline in return on capital, which then means that, what's left of the lease after it's been vacated is then passed on to a short-term lessee who's not inclined to make any particular investment in that space, which then leads to the rise of sort of temporary or seasonal operators, which then drive down the whole kind of ambience of the high street, because you've just got back-to-back fireworks shops or seasonal shops or charity shops. And that's not to say that those people are intrinsically, not welcome, but the cumulative effect is to, I think, take the high street away from a sort of pleasurable, inspiring experience to being one which is, actually probably a bit uncomfortable and in many ways quite irrelevant. So I do see that there is a defendable territory for parts of the high street for those, principally in two areas. Like one, as we've talked about before, is this like experiential side where there's the opportunity for discovery and for exploration, which you can't do as well as you can. Sorry, you can't do as well on the internet as you can in a physical place with real people. And then I think that the other side to it is what can't be offered by effectively centrally managed websites is a kind of hyper-local offering, which is all about the community and all about the environment, and where the proprietors have very intimate and first-person relationships with a lot of their customers. I think that these are two defendable dimensions for local retail, but I think the rest of it, like the surplus capacity which is associated with scaled chains and basically shops that can't offer real experience or hyperlocal, I think ultimately they probably will not be here in 10 years. But I think very positively, we've got we've got a massive paradox in this country, which is that, a human truism, whether you look at the Gobi Desert or San Francisco or London or any town, everybody wants to live in the middle. So I don't know whether you've ever seen those pictures of sort of desert settlements where people live on top of each other in tiny sand medinas, and then like literally half a mile away, there's just a load of open space. Everybody wants to live in the middle. And I think that we've got, unaffordable property for families that want to be part of local communities. And simultaneously, we've got a load of property that is no longer sustainable for retail. And I think that in the long term, actually, the problem of retail is the solution for housing. And that's what allows us actually not only to give people affordable houses, but also to create those convenience-driven markets around those shops that are actually there offering experiences and sort of local connections. That's my sort of pessimistic and optimistic take.
No, listen, I think the optimism there is absolutely, bang on. I think it actually creates an exciting vision for the future of a different experience and a different meshing of residential and shopping experience. At the heart of the conversation so far has been a recognition that basically people drive brand experience. And actually the thought process is that we think, and some of the questions that have been coming up from Joe Rigby and others as you've been talking, is that we don't pay people enough in retail, generally speaking. We don't pay the living wage. They don't necessarily get properly trained or rewarded. In the brands that do invest in talent and do actually have really strong, well-defined brands and then create really strong defined brand experiences, you notice it. If you walk into an Apple store, etc., there's an expectation that's delivered by the people. They're well trained, they're well drilled. It's an experience that actually is exciting. You look forward to doing it. However, as we said earlier on, the days perhaps are past for the undertrained, underpaid individual in a retail environment who just can't add value to that experience, because you rightly say you might as well go online if that's going to be the case. How do the brands, given they're up against it at the moment in terms of revenues, how are they going to afford to be able to reinvest in the format change that's going to be required and the talent that are going to be able to actually deliver exceptional customer experience? Can I post that one perhaps to Sue and to Tasha?
I think it's the reality of if they don't, they will cease to exist, because that will be our expectation. So it'll be about reapportioning revenue. And I think the quicker that brands and retailers start to think about a single P&L rather than the silos again, which Tash talked about, will be in a much better place. But for all of those retailers, it's really about understanding their brand and their values, and making sure that the behaviours that are associated with those values are really, really understood by employees. And I think that's, my experience is working with really large retail brands across sectors, like merchanting, for example. When the employees don't come on a journey with you and don't understand what that brand is about, it's just effort wasted. Whereas where we've worked with brands that are investing heavily in training and heavily in the experience of their colleagues, then you get real success. But I think we need to really think about some of the categories and borrow from some of the categories that have almost got hero status. So the grocery category has really come out. Now, that doesn't tackle any of the issue around paying them properly, but what does come through is actually just how they have contributed to our lives in the last year, and how they've been absolutely committed to the local environment. So almost the stature of retail staff has increased, and that's what we need to do. And again, take that momentum and rethink and I guess rename all of our colleagues. But I think it's that recognition just how important people are, because that face-to-face contact that we've all talked about is really the only thing that's going to be left in retail for stores to exist.
Actually, what was your experience of Boots in this particular space? They've got a massive number of services they sell.
I was just going to reflect on Sue's comment and this discussion we're having around pay, which is, I was thinking, I haven't yet worked at a retailer who doesn't pay national minimum living wage, so at least pay it. And then I was also thinking, most of the retailers run, the ones I've worked in, they've all done, be it a Gallup survey or a survey around engagement. And the bit that comes back again and again, which I think is fascinating, and it would be true for all of us, the truth is that people don't actually pay, often isn't the driver of where you choose to work. So of course, I'm absolutely advocating a minimum national living wage. That's a given. And I haven't been anywhere where that hasn't been the case. So therefore, what then comes through is it's much more around how you're being treated fairly, being informed, understanding the direction and the vision, and all of those aspects actually play around engagement. And I was also thinking, when I've been on the shop floor, and the co-op's a great example, because it's such a community, it's all about being closer to you and being part of the community. And I can't think of an incidence in any of those shops where I spoke to colleagues whereby they weren't, some of them aren't even counting the hours. They're actually such a strong collegiate team, and it's about looking after and supporting that community. They go above and beyond. So I think it's easy to say pay is the problem. I think actually it's probably much more about respect and ensuring that the customers come in, respect them, they don't fear for their safety. That was a big piece we looked at a lot, that actually people were frightened to work in the shop because they were frightened of the abuse they were going to get from the customers. So it's more of a reset around people, treating people properly and supporting them. And I did quite a big piece of work actually when I finished being marketing director at the co-op as a consultant. I did a colleague advocacy project there, and that was fascinating, actually really understanding how do you unlock the organisation and treat people with respect. It's more about giving them a decent break room. When people have a break, don't give them a shithole, which most of them are. Paint it, put a seat in, so it's those pieces which I think demonstrate value to an individual rather than, oh, my pay rise. So I think it's more complicated than just wage and wage alone, basically.
Yeah.
I can jump in here as well, Stephen. I think there's I did a piece of work a few years ago in China where we were developing a craft beer brand. And And the challenge for us was to actually brew 12 beers, which was really good fun, but also design the retail bar experience. We had to produce a brand, right? So imagine 3 circles: an experience, a brand, and then the service. And what we really found, especially in the Chinese market, and to Tasha's earlier point around the American service model, that we were finding it very hard to hire people who were passionate about educating people about craft beer, and being a craftsman was this idea that instead of being a person who sells beer, you're a craftsman, or a draftsman, right? And you're learning, you educate people about malt and hops and how to drink beer. And actually, there's a design challenge, I think, for a lot of retailers to design people's career paths at that point. We've seen great case studies around, like Pret a Manger is an obvious one, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard, is they didn't hire people to who could make sandwiches. They hired happy people and then taught them to make sandwiches. I mean, there's lots of different case studies like that, but it inherently can be a design challenge, and designing the people part of a lot of these experiences is where we have those conversations as well, because we can design beautiful spaces, we can put lovely brands in them, great products, but if there's people that aren't, if they don't feel motivated to sell them, then you lose it, right?
Okay, so the assumption is here that we can obviously create great brands, we can develop fantastic new spaces and environments, we can actually work with people to deliver exceptional customer experience and make them part of that whole customer journey. What's the impediment then for this change? What are we going to have to do at a national level through government, and what are we going to have to do at a local level government in order to bring about this change? Anyone?
I would think that, one of the things about the employees that we were just talking about is, I think there is a lot of sophistication if we think about how brands and businesses work really hard to create distinctive and attractive propositions for different customers. Like people like my team at Savanta were constantly working really hard to refine and create attractive propositions to get people to choose things. But for employees, it's a very blunt, one size fits all approach. And I think that one of the things that you see within employee research, and it's the same as you would do if you did consumer research, is that you end up with segments. And that all segmentations have within them a kind of an engagement continuum, which is that you've got some people for whom this category or this product's really important, and some people for whom it's like not that important, and they have a sort of more functional relationship with it because they're doing other things in their life, versus some people for whom this is a big part of their life. And I think that when you think about minimum wage, this is a common denominator which actually ends up shaping a kind of one size fits all approach to everyone. And I think the context around like the declining usefulness of a higher education degree, but the increasing cost of it, actually become an opportunity for retailers, because offering people valuable career development within the retailer or within the shop is actually like a really good way to motivate them to deliver some of the kind of higher end outcomes that you want to offer to your customers. And I think that there is a nervousness within retailers without government support, that they are going to effectively train up people who are going to leave. And so therefore, what's in it for them? Whereas if you gave someone a bonus, you wouldn't say to them, well, you have to spend it in our shop. Like that money is for them to do with what they want to do with. And we have to have the same approach, I think, to training and development, that we give you an incentive to, go the extra mile, but actually that benefit accretes to you. And that therefore is then, a gateway for people to strengthen their CVs and to improve their choices, and it helps to level up the playing field for those that can't afford the enormous overheads of going to university, but it provides them with an access point to development. But I think the government needs to help shops to fund this kind of course, so that they don't feel like they are kind of they're putting in, well, they are investing, but other people are taking the rewards. I think that they need to feel more comfortable about that. And there are many brands that do recognize qualifications, but I think if that were more a feature of brands' employee proposition, then I think that they would be able to both help people and deliver some of these higher end outcomes, while still having ostensibly a minimum wage employee base.
And Stephen, I'd say to your like, what does the nation do? I think the challenge is that I would argue is a little bit more localized than that. If I take my world, I live in London. Obviously, Oxford Street has its challenges at the moment with all these massive shops closing down. But then my local street is thriving quite well. But I'm from South Wales in a little town called Bridgend, and they all have different challenges. So Bridgend, for example, the town centre and all the lovely little shops. You're in trouble when McDonald's has to close, right, in the town centre. Mm-hmm. There's not enough demand for McDonald's, and they basically, the local borough opened this massive out of town retail experience called MacArthur Glen on the M4 corridor to Cardiff. And that, no one goes to the centre of Bridgend now. Now that's a design challenge, right? I think it's too hard to go, right, what can we do as a sector? I think you need to take micro. I would argue you have to work with boroughs, you have to work with local, hopefully, different retailers to understand that the regional challenges that you have as well.
I mean, we've seen so many hybrid models, haven't we, creep into other industries, whether it was, publishing, when it went from basically selling newspapers to basically, becoming an online retailer of content. And it's very difficult, I guess, particularly in this environment, when you're in shutdown 1 minute, you're open again, you're shut down again, to have a flexible environment and the ability to be able to actually move and change your business model as frequently as the wind, as it were. But it seems that if we don't do that, then we won't actually end up achieving the objective, which is to have a thriving high street, community-based environment with shops and experiences that people would actually value and be prepared to get out of their pajamas and walk down the high street to engage in. Now, we've spoken about the people, we've spoken about the brand, we've spoken about the need for the experience. Then how do we square that out with the local authorities? Because the local authorities basically have been driving, their budgets through the rates that they charge for businesses at a local level, in particular retailers. Now, clearly, if they're not going to be able to basically fund their budgets in this way in the future, then there's going to be obviously a big hole in their annual budget. At the same time, obviously, there's going to be, as you experienced in Bridgend, a closure of the high street and the knock-on effect that has on communities, and obviously then has an impact on crime and all sorts of other things. So, what does central government need to do to allow local government to have more flexibility to come up with more creative solutions?
It is very difficult, that one, because I think if you think about the way that the local government has historically operated, it is basically collected effectively tax at the location of transactions. But the problem with the shift online is that those taxes are not even centrally collected by HMRC, but they're actually globally distributed and often situated in tax havens. So the income that used to come in is no longer located in any accessible point, even for the UK government, never mind the local authority. And that really puts a pressure, like it really forces change, because it's not really like you could say to the government, well, we used to collect it, now you're collecting it, can you give it back to us? Because they're not collecting it. And so that then is either a global challenge, which says, actually, why is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, but taking all the money away and giving it to a small number of shareholders. Well, not a small number, but an elite group of people. But it feels unlikely that that's going to resolve the next 1 to 2 year challenges of small high streets up and down the country. So I feel that that's not trying to subsidize the status quo is not going to help. It's more about trying to identify a difficult process to get to something more sustainable, and trying to make some progress on working through that difficult process.
So to summarise what you're suggesting there, and I'd like to bring Sue into this conversation and Tasha, is that we're not going to basically tax some sort of windfall tax on the online retailers who've had a fantastic COVID and done very, very well, thank you very much, to help actually rebuild our high streets. You don't believe there's a role for that. In the same way as we saw, obviously, tax levied on other industries that actually enjoy the bounty, whether it was the petroleum companies in the past and others.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope that that's what they do. But I actually still don't believe that's the solution, because I agree with Ger that the local environment and what's happening locally is far more important, and working with local planners is more important. So I have the absolute joy and benefit of living near a town called Altrincham, and we had the joy of the Trafford Centre landing on us probably 25 years ago now, and that did the same to Bridgend. It stripped out the heart of that shopping community, just ripped it up practically overnight. But what Altrincham did was reinvest in its market, and it created a food centre with artisan restaurants, very small, very beautiful, created a local market around it, but also built an infrastructure for a high street. So smaller units, so still the big retailers, the M&S's and the Next, but built smaller units for them. And it's an absolutely thriving town. So I think I go back to, I'm not convinced that tax will be the way forward. It's how we re-engage with local planners to create those multi-purpose spaces, and how we factor that in. Now the interesting thing that I've observed is I also live near Warrington, which is less nice as a town centre, and they've tried to do exactly the same thing. We've seen what Altrincham have done and gone, okay, I'm going to redeploy that in Warrington. It hasn't quite worked because the space hasn't been used in the same way. So they've not maximised the whole experience that they could have done, because it looks like the planners haven't quite worked with the experiential people. So I think it's just really, really focusing on how you can build an offer in your local community that is right for the local community. It goes right back to understanding the behaviour of the people in the local vicinity, rather than trying to globalize everything, because I just don't think that's the solution anymore.
And just quickly, Sue, I think that shows the value of using quantitative data, but also qualitative to make it more localized to Warrington. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of just speaking to people. It doesn't have to be hundreds and hundreds of people. I think data is really powerful for us to find big visions, but actually the nuances of execution is what designers really get inspired by, is people and stories and storytelling.
Yeah.
I had an interesting question, just taking your role here, Stephen, if you don't mind, to see what people think. But one of the things that we found in our data was that low price is often interpreted as being responsive to people's not poverty, but it's sort of sensitive to their lack of income or not having very much money, and that this becomes this has the effect potentially of making sustainable or sustainably priced propositions only relevant for well-off people. I don't know whether anyone's come across this, But so that then when people sort of look at the high street, or they look at what's available, let's say from, I don't know, a small clothing shop in the high street versus what they can get something similar online for, that they basically realize, or that they get the sense that the high street then, I mean, I live in a small Kent town. The thriving bit of the high street is basically for posh people, because everything's so much more expensive, because it's relatively more expensive. And I guess that's quite an important thing for us to bear in mind when we think about community cohesion, is that we can't reinvent these spaces only with high price boutiques that then become sort of, they're not rational choices for people on a budget.
No, and I think it's all very well if you're living in Marlow or where else I have high price, high value type operations, but it's not a solution. And
because it could have the opposite effect. It could
absolutely.
actually create sort of ghettos where absolutely only people who've got quite a lot of money and who don't mind paying over the odds,
because it's convenient and it's local. Yeah. I mean, Joe Rigby, and I think we've also had Caroline and others raise some really interesting points with some really useful insights given in their experiences. So I'd like to open it up now, if I may, to all of our attendees today. If they've got any questions, Joe in particular, I think you've had quite a few really interesting insights. Caroline, also, if you're able to share your thoughts with us, that would be fantastic. Rebecca and others, I'd be really interested for you to share your points of view with the panel, if you're able to.
Yeah, I mean, I can do. So we're in difficult times because the high streets are, I mean, in my ward, I've lost 5 shops this month that they've just had to shut down. They didn't get the grants from the government. And they're also in highly polluted areas. But trying to talk to them and say, you could take the parking away because actually you're the only ones that use it. We don't tend to have that many customers. We could turn it into pleasant places. Balham, where I live, is going to go under big sort of regeneration. They will try and take away the car parks, because if you create a space where lots of cars can come, people won't come because it becomes dangerous to walk around and pollute. The pollution puts people off, and you think that most people live within a 15-minute walk anyway, and there's pedal cargo bikes being used now for last mile delivery. So there is a real vision. I think it's going to be slowed down because of the very fixed view that you need to have parking. So I see more like a 20-30 year out vision before we can really bring transformation and create these beautiful town spaces.
Joe, sorry, I was desperately trying to find your picture on which is why I didn't come to you right to the end of the visual, so I apologise. So you're a councillor, and obviously you're fighting with this on a daily basis. And do you get direction from regional or central government in terms of what you should be doing, or is it you given total autonomy?
So there's planning guidelines. It tends and you put in for bids, and the bids are judged based on it. So the Putney High Street bid, which I'm talking about at committee tomorrow, it came bottom of the list for the whole of London in terms of vision. So Putney High Street's dying, and the council's response is to widen the pavements but to keep the traffic. And they've got the bid, they'll widen the pavements, the traffic will stay, it won't do anything to save Putney High Street. It will take another 20 years before somebody says we need to pedestrianise Putney High Street. But it's down to each council and the vision. I'm in opposition, so I don't get to have that much say.
No, but I mean, that's a really interesting point which we haven't spoken about so far, and obviously the environmental impacts. And the fact, obviously, everybody within, particularly larger cities, it's a real apparent issue for them, and obviously they're desperately concerned about it. The other issue, I guess, which also came up with some questions earlier on from Paul Hackett, was relating to actually 2/3 of the adults in the UK now factor health and well-being in their daily decision-making. To what extent does the panel think high street retailers can play a proactive role in bringing improved well-being to the nation? Again, a very hot topic, together with obviously the environmental impact. I'll put that one out to the team to have a ponder on, and if anyone wants to pick that one up whilst I go and I can, another speaker.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. And we've seen success in that area already. So brands like Lululemon, who are very community focused, a brand clearly with enormous purpose, but they use their spaces in the way that we're describing the whole of the space should be created, as in their multi-purpose. So they transition smoothly from a retailing environment and a transactional retailing environment into a yoga studio. And so there are plenty of brands who have the capacity to be able to do that and should have an active role in doing that. So particularly the sports brands, they can absolutely do it. I think, and Boots, I'm sure Tash may be able to comment on that directly. But actually it needs to be relevant. That purpose needs to be absolutely relevant. So it's not right for all brands to wade into the well-being story, because it's just not relevant. It's not part of their purpose. So we shouldn't charge everybody to do that, but absolutely where brands can, because it's part of their DNA, and then Nike and the Adidas, people who have that capacity and that reach with audience, then fundamentally we should be charging them to do that and to bring that thinking around well-being and exercise into the spaces.
Thank you, Sue. Caroline, welcome. You've been
Hello.
on the chat box, so I thought I'd bring you into the conversation, if I may.
Yeah, of course. I mean, everything that's been said so far obviously resonates on a number of different points. I actually work for Clarion. We're a law firm, so we talk to businesses about strategy, but this takes me back to actually something earlier in my career. I worked for quite a successful budget retailer for a number of years, which post 2008 recession, they knew their market incredibly well. So what they did was they kind of targeted some of the smaller out of town areas, which maybe didn't have the larger supermarkets, they didn't have the retail outlets and the kind of spaces in such. And they really kind of accommodated their own customer. They knew that the majority of them, didn't have access to public transport. So when supermarkets and wholesalers were buying huge boxes of, washing powder and, household goods, the budget supply was feeding really into the smaller sized items that someone could obviously put in their carry bags and get the bus home or the train or even walk to. So I feel as if they did incredibly well in that time because they knew their customers so well. And I think that obviously now what we do is we look for these hotspots in the way of supermarkets, we look at them as real anchors to areas. But do you really feel as if now, especially now we're in a very socially focused world, there's space for, brands to really appeal to these smaller community hubs? I mean, community mapping is something that we're seeing that a lot of our clients are doing. Earlier, Natasha mentioned about Decathlon with their kind of services that their people provide to the stores. And we find that people are really looking at that community piece, looking at where they can channel that localized effect into it. What type of brands do you see to fit in there, kind of alongside the supermarkets and retail parks?
Yeah, panel, good question. Over to you.
Yeah.
I think one question is whether or not that job to be done necessarily needs to be done by a brand, I think. Because I think one of the issues is about this sort of trying to scale brands and provide sort of very consistent experiences, so that what Nando's is going to be like, what New Look's going to be like, but whether or not that knowing of the customer is actually something which is kind of almost in a way ironed out of those formulations in a way, because they're not necessarily about the local environment as much. I think some brands can attempt to do that, but I think maybe businesses which are not pursuing that sort of efficiency strategy are possibly better suited to it, because they can focus on it and they're not focusing on scale and consistency, across multiple locations as an objective. So I think businesses can do that. I think sometimes brands struggle because the branding strategy can work against it.
Okay. An example was Timpson's. So Timpson is obviously a large cobbler that I'm sure most of you will know, but I think they actually give the kind of autonomy to the managers of each of the individual stores, where they can actually provide some services for free, and it's entirely up to the manager to be able to do that based on that kind of community set. I think that's what I was leaning to. Sorry, tricky question.
Well, I think though that the middle ground is at, potentially is in like franchising potentially, because a lot of the symbol stores, like the retailers that that use the symbols of like Nisa or Londis or etc. They are actually offering probably much more localization because they have those degrees of freedom. Whereas the really formal brands, they get labour standards, they get set ranges, they get range from the headquarters, they get, high staff turnover, etc. So yeah, maybe that kind of franchised route could be the best of both worlds.
I unfortunately have to bring this talk to a conclusion, and not there is a conclusion that we had, rather than the fact that there needs to be an awful lot more debate about this. But it strikes me that where we are now is that, we have to accept that the world of online is not going to change. And the fact, whilst we could perhaps tax them in the short term, find ways to actually offset that tax and help people in the high street, they're just going to get better at what they do. Drones, robots, faster, cleaner home delivery systems are coming. So it's really just a question now, I guess, of what we do with the space and the communities that we have left, and how all our communities at local level can benefit from that. It's going to require the creativity of the people in the room today, and it's going to require local and central government to create a taxable environment that will encourage further innovation and creativity. But it's also going to require local communities working together. And as you rightly said, I think on the call, a number of you said, it's about listening and finding out what people really want and how they do or don't value their high street environments. But equally too, being ever conscious of your target audience and making sure that you are supplying the right range of services at the right price to make it all relevant. So this one's not going to go away, and it tips into really what we were talking about last week, which is, we are a nation of shopkeepers. We spoke about the importance of rebuilding brand Britain, and I would suggest to you this is a pretty good place to start. We are going to see, unfortunately, high levels of unemployment, but that does create opportunities for new businesses to grow. We just to make sure that actually people are given both the encouragement and the support they need to create these retail environments of the future. And I think it's an exciting time, but it is going to require everyone to pull together to be part of the solution. Thank you very much to our august panel. Thank you for your time once again. Next week, we're going to be moving on to talk about mental health in mental times. We've got two very interesting speakers. One is going to be talking about resilience training, Dr. Sarah Khalid, and the ever popular Michelle Morgan will be back to talk about mental health training. This particular session is really focused on trying to help agency owners, clients, people in senior management to be able to build their resilience in order that they can actually help to coach their teams. And finally, please don't forget to register for our next 5 p.m. club, which will be hosted by Byrne on Thursday, the 11th of February. It should be, as ever, a productive networking opportunity over a glass of wine. That's wine. We'll provide the environment if you can bring wine. If you haven't registered, please let Isabel know. She'll send you a registration link. Apart from that, I just want to wish everybody a happy shopping day for whatever they're doing. Thank you once again to Natasha, to Julian, to Geraint, and to Sue, as well as all of our guest speakers. Really interesting session. We could probably go on debating this for hours. Thank you, and have a great day. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.